Okay, Shana Tova, everyone. Good Yantif. I think we're going to get started. My name is Warren Klein. For those of you who don't know, I am the director and curator of our Bernard Museum here at Temple Emanu-El. It's really always a pleasure to have you join me today for this, as I like to call, a non-traditional study session. So as in years past, I'm going to be really sharing a behind-the-scenes look at some of the material in our museum and our archival collections this year. Because we're celebrating our 180th anniversary of the congregation, and just a few weeks ago we opened up our special exhibition on the subject. So that is the theme of my talk today. We're going to look at a little bit more in-depth into the exhibition. And I know some of you were here at the opening, and I promise there may be a little bit of overlap, but we're really going to take a deeper dive. This past April, many of you were present at the special service where we officially celebrated our 180th anniversary. Founded in April of 1845 by 37 German-speaking Jewish immigrants, it is really incredible to be in our sanctuary and recall what humble beginnings we came from. I have the honor of illustrating or visualizing our 180-year history. But where do I begin? For some context, our museum collection contains about 1,500 objects. We have a photo archive of over 2,000 photographs dating from the 1890s to the early 2000s. And our archival collections contain over 100,000 documents, manuscripts, rare books, and other ephemera pertaining to the congregation's history. A chronological history would likely have taken up more space than we have in the museum, where a highlights exhibition would likely to have been too little or excluded certain aspects of our history. The compromise I came up with is a thematic exhibition focusing on themes of leadership, worship, music, community and membership, education, our physical spaces, our buildings, and of course, lastly, our earliest years. This is the first gallery of the exhibition. The other challenge I faced when creating this exhibition is the narrow focus on Emanu-El and our history. While our congregation and leadership have often been a beacon to other communities across the United States, our museum receives over 10,000 visitors annually, and I want that momentum to continue, and also for these individuals who are outside of our community to feel engaged and interested. So, to many, I have been describing this current exhibition as two exhibitions in one. While the first gallery is fully collections-based, the second gallery focuses on the Our Crowd, specifically on 4 Jewish families from New York's Gilded Age. No coincidence, capitalizing on the recent fascination with all things Gilded Age, why not take a look at some of the Jewish stories that are so often absent from the mainstream media? Those families that we focused on are the Seligmans, the Warburgs, the Schiffs, and the Strausses. We begin the exhibition with our founding document, the meeting minutes from April 6th of 1845. Written in German, this manuscript, about half of what is displayed, I should mention about half of what is displayed in the first gallery are really on display for the first time ever. So this manuscript went about 10 months of conservation just so it could be on display for the first time. The pages had become quite brittle, and many of them were coming loose from the spine. The 19th century iron gall ink was slowly starting to deteriorate in some areas. And while it does not look brand new, and it certainly shouldn't, it is now stabilized and secure for the next generation. In this first meeting, the 37 men raised a collective $28.25 to begin the congregation. They hired their first rabbi, Leo Merzbacher, and chose a president, Abraham Mickelbacher. And they called themselves Emanu-El, God is with us. Hoping to adopt Judaism to America, they brought with them the many early qualities of the Reform movement in Germany, and therefore, we are the oldest continuous Reform congregation in New York City. They met in this building on the second floor of a rented loft on the corner of Grand and Clinton Streets in what is today known as the Lower East Side, then known as Klein, Deutschland, or Little Germany. However, this was not the first time these men met. About 1 year prior, many of them gathered to form a Kulturverein, or culture society. Vereins were common in German society and were sort of these clubs made up of people with common interests, or in this case, a common background. We don't know for the exact reasons why they went from Verein to congregation, but I suspect the challenges they faced as recent immigrants and their desire to maintain their Jewish identity and practice in a new land were contributing factors. Recently, the original pulpit Bible of the congregation, so that's this right here, was recently unearthed. The Bible was acquired by our first rabbi, Leo Merzbacher, and used through the early 20th century. The inscription that I've put on the slide, while hard to make out, notes that Dr. Merzbacher acquired it on Thanksgiving Day in 1856. The bottom inscription notes that it was passed down to his successor, Dr. Samuel Adler. However, this made me pause for a moment because we know, according to our records and other genealogical records that are out there, that Dr. Merzbacher died in 1856, well before Thanksgiving Day. So how did he acquire it on Thanksgiving Day? Of course, I think this is the thing that legends are made of. It certainly is a 19th century inscription. Perhaps they were off by 10 years. Maybe he acquired it in 1846. We can't know for certain. Either way, it does have a great provenance, and we're so happy to have it back into our collection. And the last item on view in the early years section is this Kiddush cup. Inscribed to Rabbi Merzbacher, it was presented to him in April of 1849 from the school committee of Congregation Anshe Chesed. Anshe Chesed was founded in 1830s and was one of the two congregations that merged in 1874 to become Beth-El. Of course, Beth-El and Emanu-El consolidated in 1927. In our archives, we have Anshe Chesed's early records, and according to their minutes, this cup was purchased as sort of a thank you to Rabbi Merzbacher for his services at 2 examinations. Perhaps he was also teaching in their school, perhaps he oversaw a test. We can't know for certain, but what we do know is that Rabbi Merzbacher was sort of this elusive character in the 1840s. Now remember, 1840s New York, this is the second wave of Jewish immigration to our country, and there were not yet any American-born rabbis being trained. So perhaps Rabbi Merzbacher, is sort of, in his resume, had to go from congregation to congregation teaching. We know that previously, before coming to us, he was at Congregation Road of Shalom before they became Reform, and was actually let go because he had too many kind of radical ideas for the time. So it would be wonderful if we were able to do more research on our first spiritual leader, so to be determined. The next section of the exhibition takes us to worship. I am particularly fascinated by the role that our clergy has played over the decades in creating new, innovating prayer books that are often leading spiritual guides for our movement. I am also a strong proponent of the idea that in our temple's history, the more things changed, the more they stayed the same. And this can certainly be applicable to our liturgy. So here are just some early examples of different prayer books we have in our collection that are in the exhibition. So on the right is Dr. Adler's revision of Merzbacher's original 1850s prayer book. This was updated first in 1860 and then 2 more times by the middle of the 1870s. We do have Merzbacher's first Machzor, or High Holy Day prayer book in our collection. It's also on view. We do not have his original prayer book. That is a very, very scarce, rare volume, and I don't believe there are any in public collections that exist. The center volume is Rabbi Einhorn's prayer book, or Olat Tamid, first published in 1872 while he was still rabbi at Baltimore's Har Sinai. And the third example seen on the left is Gustav Gottheil's hymnal. This was the first Jewish hymnal published in America. And sometimes it is also the exteriors of these prayer books that are also fascinating. So today, you come to synagogue, you're given a prayer book as you walk in, and you leave it and you go home. But this was not the case in the 19th century. In fact, you had to own your own prayer book, and you brought it with you to synagogue. And perhaps, a sign of your own interest or your own patriotism, you could often have them decorated or inscribed with the congregation's name, with your own name. So these are just two examples. On the left, you can see one that has this beautiful gold embossed image of our 43rd Street building. I like to think that, again, it was maybe some home synagogue pride, or perhaps there was a lost and found. You brought it back. You knew which building to bring it back to. And then in the middle is this beautiful velvet cover with gold embellishes. And this is a prayer book that belonged to a woman. We have several in our collection. And how do we know it belonged to a woman? It's often the middle plate will have her name. And often in these books, women were the family history keepers. And so you often have the names of grandchildren that were born, anniversaries. In one instance, we have someone cut out all the obituaries of members of their families, and they were pasted into these prayer books. So again, kind of interesting genealogical history in some of these prayer books and Bibles as well. Our lay leaders, From our very early days, we have been blessed with innovative clergy who have become influential figures in the Reform movement in America. We've already talked about Merzbacher, but take a look at Samuel Adler, seen on the far right, our second rabbi. Born in Worms in 1809, he came to the U.S. to lead the congregation in the 1850s upon Merzbacher's death. Rabbi Gottheil, on the left, was our first English-speaking rabbi. He came to Emanu-El in the 1870s after leading a congregation in Manchester, England. He became a leading figure in American Judaism, helping to found the Jewish Publication Society and start a seminary here at Emanu-El. Temple Beth El's first leader, seen in the center, Rabbi David Einhorn, was a staunch abolitionist. He traveled the country preaching against slavery in the 1860s, eventually being driven out of Baltimore and coming to New York. This early, small-scale photograph of him, known as a carte de visite, was taken in Baltimore in around 1855 and is a recent acquisition into our collection, and the only known photograph of him to exist. In our collection, we have a portrait of him, if everyone's ever been to the 8th floor, and a sculpture of him. But it's very exciting for us to be able to showcase this for the very first time. Also on view for the first time is the portrait of Rabbi Gottheil. And this is the one behind me, and you can see right here on the left, there was some severe damage. This was actually found in a closet in the 1980s and fixed up. It is also on view for the very first time ever. And what's interesting about this, I did a little bit of research, so it was made by a Jewish artist upon Gottheil's retirement here at Emanu-El, and was used and sent out to several publications. So when he would write an article or in his obituary, when they talked about him in the Times, they actually used this image, and then it was lost or forgotten for several decades, and we're very fortunate to be able to have it now in our collection. Our lay leaders have been among America's most prominent Jews. Their impact on business, as attorneys, judges, politicians, and philanthropists is felt way beyond the walls of our temple. Here is one great example from the 19th century, and many of you are likely familiar with this silver vase on the right, made by Edward Moore, who was head of Tiffany's silver department. It was made for this man behind me, Louis May, to celebrate his 25th anniversary as president of the congregation in 1888. There's an engraving of the 43rd Street building on the front and the dedicatory inscription to May on the back. It was actually given back to us by May's son in 1931. And on the left, a never-before exhibited portrait of May from about 1870. What's interesting, you can see he's holding a bunch of papers rolled up, and if you have a chance to go up to the museum and look very closely, it's very faint, but you can see these are actually the bylaws of our congregation. May was involved in many Jewish organizations. He also served on the board of the Mount Sinai Hospital, And he died in 1897, and in his memory, a stained glass window, also by Tiffany, was commissioned and installed in our 43rd Street building in 1899, and that window, of course, is now in our Beth-El chapel. One aspect of our history that is often hard for members and even staff to wrap their heads around is that temple membership was not the same in the 19th century as it is today, right? So today, you pay your dues, you choose your seats, it's pretty much the same across the board. But in the 19th century, especially with the opening of our 43rd Street building, right? This was our first building that we had built from the ground up with 1,500 seats. You actually, if you could afford it, you purchased your pew, right? So this was your pew for your family. That is where you sat every time you came to services. And this on the left is actually a deed. And they treated it like real estate, just like your deed to your home. And you had to pay taxes on it. And it could be passed down to your children and so forth. And of course, there had to be the rules and regulations of selling these pews. And so that is what the booklet is in the center. And on the far left, this is probably one of the earliest documents, too, that we have in the exhibition. These were pew tax forms. You can see that one of them is actually in German, and this was the tax that this man paid on his pew back in 1847. So kind of just a fascinating glimpse into not necessarily, who our members were. I mean, that's certainly evident in the second gallery, but just in terms of how membership worked and how it supported the temple back then. Of course, we couldn't not look at some of our buildings. So here we are today in our fifth and what I like to call the final home of our congregation. But of course, that is not where we started. And so just a few highlights to show you from this section. On the right, upside down, of course, this is a ceremonial trowel that was inscribed with every name of the building committee for our 43rd Street building in 1866. The center image on the bottom, this was a ticket to the cornerstone laying in 1866. And it might be hard to see, but on the very bottom it says, admit bearer and lady. So a lady could not come unaccompanied by a man. And on the left, a postcard of Temple Beth-El. Beth-El, this building was built in 1891, and it really dominated the Fifth Avenue landscape, right? This was before all of these grand apartment buildings lined Fifth Avenue. You could really see Beth-El from almost any place in Central Park back then with its faceted dome. And those of you who have been to the museum are certainly familiar with this piece on the left. This is an architectural fragment from our 43rd Street building. It's pretty much always in the museum because we can't store it anywhere else. It's so large. And how it came to us is a rather interesting story. In the mid-1980s, my predecessor received a phone call from an antique consignment store in Connecticut saying that they had this object that belonged to Emanu-El. And the only clue was, again, I had mentioned our photo archive. We have over 2,000 historic photos in our collection. And we were able to look at some of those images and notice that this was an architectural element, a decorative piece from that 43rd Street building. So this is not one of our photographs, but kind of better to illustrate this from the Museum of the City of New York. This was near Fifth Avenue, above the organ, and we don't know why someone saved it or how. Perhaps they were on the demolition crew. Either way, I'm so glad that we acquired it. It's truly such a unique piece, right? We talk about some of the elements of our 43rd Street building that were intentionally saved, like the Beth-El window that I mentioned, the Tiffany window. But this was unintentionally saved. And it's a great example that you can get close up to and see hand-carved American craftsmanship from the 1860s. And so that is included in this section as well. I felt that education was a pillar or theme that was vital to represent in the exhibition, since we've had a school at Emanu-El since our earliest days. And here are just a selection of pieces, from confirmation certificates, from ribbons celebrating anniversaries. But I included a letter from Albert Einstein. And I want to read, I was able to find in the yearbooks that we saved in the archives, that was the letter that our students wrote to Albert Einstein in 1950. Dear Professor Einstein, our class is very interested in what you are trying to do to improve the precarious position of our world today. In honor of your achievements and in honor of your birthday, we are planting 12 trees in Israel. We want you to know that you are among the many outstanding Jews and are unanimously elected as a person who has not only helped the world, but our own Jewish community as well. You have set the mark we think that every human being should try to live up to. And so Einstein wrote back to them a thank you. And about 10 years ago, I guess one of the students was allowed to keep the letter, and he was in that religious school class in 1950, and he donated it back to our collection. So it's just, again, really just wonderful for people to see that, and I think it's very exciting to really see that Einstein took the time to write back. Some of you might not be aware, but in addition to our temple archives that I oversee, we also have a separate music archives overseen by Charles Sprouls, music librarian and a member of our choir for many years. And I had the great pleasure of consulting him and borrowing items from our music archive for this exhibition. What I wasn't able to show in the slides, but is on view, is the oldest known piece of sheet music that we have in our music library, a score that's from the 1890s of the Adoration. It was really so wonderful for me to be able to see our music archive and really get a close-up look for the very first time. We certainly have a lot of pieces in the music section that have to do with Lazar Saminsky, our longtime music director. He's seen in this photograph on the right conducting the choir in about 1940. We even have his original baton that he used when he was music director here. In the center is a score that was arranged by a member of our choir named Henry Burley. He was actually, in fact, the first Black member of our choir, and this dates back from 1908. It's really fascinating. We had a documentary crew here earlier this year from Erie, Pennsylvania, because that was where Burley was born, and they're doing a documentary on Burley. He worked in several congregations in New York. This is the only Jewish congregation he worked in. But we were able to provide a few items from our archive that recognize Burley and his contributions. So this is in the exhibition. And on the far left, a photograph of one of our early 20th century cantors named Simon Schläger. And what's so important about this photograph, it's also the only known photograph of Schläger, but it's the only known photograph of our Beth-El arc doors. That is, these doors were installed in our previous building at 43rd Street, where this image was taken. And they were kept and then reinstalled in the Beth-El Chapel. I've spoken about this a few times. The notion, or the history that these were made by Tiffany was actually lost to us for many years. And it wasn't until a colleague of mine at the Metropolitan Museum was doing a little bit of digging in their photograph collection and found the original design for these doors on Tiffany letterhead. And through a lot of other research, we were able to get that back to us too. So she wrote an article about that, but it's significant because you can see the changes that the artist made to these doors when they were reinstalled in the chapel. Mainly, they were dyed to match the frame, and the enamel pieces were put on. So the next time you're in the Beth-El Chapel, I suggest you take a close look at those doors because they do look like one unified piece, but they were not originally. So they are bronze, they're cast bronze, and they were dyed this kind of very dark gray gunmetal finish to match the outside. Yeah. So now on to the second gallery of the exhibition. This gallery is devoted to the Our Crowd, as I mentioned, and the four families. But I didn't arrive at these families overnight. I certainly had a wish list of other families I would have liked to include, specifically the Guggenheims. About a year ago, I had gone to the Guggenheim Museum to use their archive because they had noted that they had a collection having to do with the family. It was a bit of a disappointing collection. It was a very thin box, And the only thing of note that I found in there was a copy of a portrait of Meyer Guggenheim, who was the patriarch of the family, who came over from Europe. And on the back it said, in the offices of I think, the museum staff. So of course I called and I said, where is this portrait? No one could answer me. I called registrars, curators, I called other organizations, and finally they had told me that this portrait was given back to one of the many Guggenheim foundations. So I was pursuing this for quite a while, and at a certain point you have to just kind of move on. The Lehmans were also a family that I was debating on representing, but however, the Lehmans are often very well represented in our museum collection, as the basis of our museum collection was donated by Judge Irving Lehman, and we've done many displays and remarks on this in the past that I thought it was time to focus on some other families. So that's kind of how I got there. We also, of course, have a copy of the first edition of Our Crowd in the gallery, as well as a large blow-up of this kind of famous family tree that is on the end leaves. And I want to make mention of this family tree. I mean, first of all, it's super helpful when you walk around the gallery and connecting, okay, whose daughter married this person and how all the families were connected. It's very helpful in figuring that out. But Harper Collins or Stephen Birmingham was actually not the one who invented this family tree. I was doing quite a bit of research and found out that this family tree was actually made 10 years prior by a scholar named Barry Supple, who had written an article in an academic business journal looking at these families and their business history. They did not credit him at all, so we did credit him in the museum, and I thought that was important to note as well here. The first family I want to focus on are the Seligmans. Joseph Seligman, with his brothers, founded J&W Seligman and Company in 1864. It soon became the most prominent investment banking firm in the country and helped to play a vital role in financing the Union through bonds during the Civil War. Later, the firm invested heavily in railroads, steel, and oil, and even helped to finance the construction of the Panama Canal. These two portraits of Joseph and his wife Babette are on loan to us from the New York Historical. And oftentimes when I'm working on an exhibition and we are borrowing things from other institutions, I'm really just working with thumbnail images of these items. And these really were small images. Of course, we knew the dimensions of the portraits from the registrar, but it wasn't until the portraits came to us and we were unwrapping them did I notice the necklace that Babette is wearing. And I'm not sure you can see it from here, but again, another great excuse to come see it in the gallery. But on her necklace is actually a Star of David. And I thought this was so interesting for a woman of her stature. For these portraits are circa 1860s. It's not often, we think of many people today wearing Stars of David necklaces. But anyway, it was really such an interesting element to the painting that I'm not even sure the curators at New York Historical were aware of that. And I want to mention the image on the right, probably the ugliest piece in the exhibition. I don't often say that about pieces in the exhibition, but it was important for us to have this represented as well. This is an anti-Semitic political cartoon featuring Joseph Seligman. In 1877, he was the subject of the first widely publicized case of anti-Semitism in the United States, meaning that it made both national and Jewish news as well. He and his family were denied entry into the Grand Union Hotel in Saratoga because the manager decided the presence of Jewish guests was hurting business. The incident, and so this led to protests, boycotts, anti-Semitic backlash, and I just want to describe the image as well. So you can see Seligman is up here, not the greatest image of him, and he's identified as Seligman, Jew. Below him is the Grand Union Hotel, and on top of the portico of the hotel are statues of pigs and a flag of a pig. Of course, the notion that, Jews don't eat pigs. And then down here, you have Seligman and his family entering the Grand Union Hotel wearing prosthetic upturned noses. It's a very ugly cartoon, but I felt it was very important to represent in this section because while we think of all these families as exceedingly wealthy, and they were just as wealthy as all the other Gilded Age families that were not Jewish, they had to face anti-Semitism and adversity, and really forcing them to create their own society, their own social clubs, schools, businesses, etc. It really wasn't as glamorous sometimes as we think of it today. So that is why that kind of ugly cartoon is part of the exhibition. Moving on to the shifts, I am thrilled that for the first time ever, we have a loan from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And that is on the left, this 1894 portrait of Frida Schiff, painted by Swedish artist Anders Zorn. And just to tell a quick story, when a curator from the Met had to come as they dropped off the painting as a courier, and she was telling me a little bit about the artist. Her specialty is in European art. And she was telling me that this man was married to a Jewish woman, which I had not known about. And we were discussing that perhaps this was really his entree into painting Jewish members of society. I mean, certainly we know that Sargent also had Jewish patrons, but apparently Zorn within Europe had many, many Jewish patrons. So that was fascinating for me to learn. But I was also very excited that I was able to teach her a little something, because on view, we also have Frida Schiff, later Warburg. She wrote a self-published autobiography in the early 1950s. And in it, she talks about sitting for this painting when she was 18 years old. It was actually a gift to her mother. And she talks about the dress that she is wearing is the same dress she wore a year later when she met her later husband, Felix Warburg. And, the Met does incredible research, but they were unaware of this autobiography. So it was very exciting to be able to share that with her, and they've now since changed their cataloging and added that to their record as well. In the center is a set of Torah ornaments, one of the great highlights from our collection. These were given by Jacob Schiff, her father, in honor of her confirmation in 1890, and they were made in Germany, in Frankfurt. So Schiff was born in Frankfurt and still had family there. And apparently he went there quite often, almost every summer. And in the center of the shield is this very scrawny Habsburg-looking Germanic eagle. But on the eagle itself is an American flag. And we like to think of it as representing Schiff's dual identities. He was very proud of his German heritage, but yet it is in the United States that is where he made his fortune, he raised his family, and so it's really representing Schiff on this shield. And on the right, a portrait of him on loan to us from the Leo Baeck Institute. I work with a wonderful designer, and how did we separate each of these families in the exhibition, but through large-scale graphic blow-ups of their Gilded Age mansions. So some of you might know this one. This is only one of them that still stands. This is the Warburg Mansion that is now the Jewish Museum at 1109 Fifth Avenue. And speaking of the Warburgs, another family represented in the exhibition. We have 3 loans from the Jewish Museum. So this sculpture bust of Felix Warburg. And we have 2 paintings of the Warburg Mansion while it was still a family home in the late 1930s. I specifically chose 2 images that I thought, for those who have been to the Jewish museums many times, are still kind of these Gothic elements that are still represented in their gallery spaces as well. So Frida married Felix, who came from a prominent Hamburg banking family. And I mentioned they made their home at 92nd Street and Fifth Avenue. And the other piece that we have is actually from our collection. This is the manuscript on the right. And this is just really a little notebook. It belonged to a woman named Julia Clemens. She was a teacher in our religious school in and around the early 20th century. And she became the private tutor to the Our Crowd children. So as you flip through it, you see the names of the Warburgs and the Schiffs and the Guggenheims, etc. And in it is listed the names of the children that she tutored and also the lessons that she gave them in Bible and Jewish studies. And this was mailed to me I didn't ask for it, by the great-granddaughter of Julia about in the past 10 years. And it is really just such a gem. And I think it's wonderful because it's illustrating how important education was to these families, right? Perhaps some of these students went to religious school. We certainly know that Frida herself was confirmed here. But the fact that they also had private tutelage in Jewish studies and Bible, I think, is so important that oftentimes we look at these, the Our Crowd family tree, and we can maybe look at the descendants and who's Jewish and who's not Jewish. But, during this time period, Jewish education was certainly something that they valued. Last, but certainly not least of the families, are the Strausses. The Strauss family originated in Otterburg, Germany, and they arrived in the United States in the 1850s and set up a pushcart business in the South. After the Civil War, they headed north and eventually sold pottery and cut glass in the basement of Macy's when it was on 14th Street. By the 1890s, they were the sole owners of the company and moved its headquarters to 34th Street and Herald Square, where it still stands today. Sons Nathan and Isidore ran the company and feature prominently in the exhibition, while brother Oscar went to Columbia Law School and became a public servant, the first Jew to serve in a cabinet position. Now, I'm going to go on to talk a lot about the Strausses. We were very fortunate to work very closely with the family and their historical society, and so that is why the exhibition is weighted a little bit more heavily to the Strausses, but rather fascinating nonetheless. Like many of the families, the Strausses were a family divided between Beth-El and Emanu-El. Isidore and Ida were members of Emanu-El, while Nathan and Lena were members of Beth-El. And this was not uncommon, as families were divided amongst the congregations, and then we became one in the early in the 1920s. And I wanted to talk about Nathan Strauss for a moment. And so here we have on the left, this is an early photograph of him as a child taken in Georgia, where they lived when he was a boy, and then of course later on. He was really an ardent Zionist, unlike so many of the other individuals that I've been speaking about. He and his wife Lena made several trips to Mandatory Palestine, all before the 1930. He had been donating to Zionist causes. In fact, the city of Netanya is actually named after him. And one of my wonderful volunteers earlier this year stumbled across a letter that I want to read to you. So sorry, I'm going to advance a few slides. Yes, this was just very interesting to me. So it's from March of 1923. It's a little bit hard to see, and this is not in the exhibition, but I just wanted to share it. Dear sirs, I hereby tender my resignation as a member of Temple Beth-El. I do so sorrowfully and after careful consideration. The stand that your minister takes against Zionism, I consider the act of a traitor to his people. A minister's mission should be to build up and not tear down. He is entitled to his private opinion, but to inculcate into our youth this malicious misconception of Zionism should be stopped. Real true Jews, as well as numerous Gentiles throughout the world, are Zionists without anyone questioning their patriotism. Being safe in free countries where they enjoy equal rights, it becomes the duty of the Jews to help those who wait in suffering and prayer to get to their homeland. This is their solace and the hope which keeps them alive in their untold misery. I owe it to myself, as well as to my associates in the sacred cause of Zionism, that I have no connection with one who would tear down what we are working so hard to build up. You read this, and he was so ahead of his time. During this period in the early 20th century, it was really across the board amongst Reform Jews to not be Zionists. Why he felt this way, it's interesting. I've been, trying to communicate with members of the family and read more about his thoughts, but perhaps it doesn't matter why. It's still just fascinating nonetheless. And we also found the corresponding letter that was given back to him by Beth-El, which was not so pretty, and of course defending the rabbi and his stance. This was Rabbi Samuel Schulman at the time, who often would give sermons, and I was able to look in our archive, and many of them had titles and themes that were, yes, very anti-Zionism of the time. I just want to go back a moment to talk a little bit about Nathan and his history and philanthropy. And so this is a piece that we have in the exhibition. This is a wimple. Wimples are a custom amongst Ashkenazi Jews, and they're made of the swaddling cloths of a baby boy after his bris. And they are then inscribed with his name. So this one has, it says Natan ben Eliezer, so he was Nathan, the son of Eliezer. And they're very long, so they're sewn together. They're about 100 inches long, and they all have the same formula. So it's the date of birth, may he grow up to learn Torah, to be under the chuppah, and to do good deeds. And it is exceedingly rare to have a wimple from a known individual. Oftentimes, they were given to synagogues and used at various times throughout the child's life. We don't know why the family kept their wimples. We know that Isidore's is at the New York Public Library. When Macy's was sold by the family, all of the business records, which included a lot of family records, went to the New York Public Library. And so it's very exciting for us to be able to display this with other materials from the family. And Nathan, as I mentioned, made many trips to the Holy Land, and he was oftentimes given many gifts. He often would purchase items from the Bezalel School, which was an arts and crafts school, and they all trickled down to us because Nathan's daughter Sissy married Irving Lehman. Irving Lehman's Judaica collection came to us in 1945. And with Judge Lehman's collection is this handwritten notebook. So we're often able to match the items where he acquired things either at auction, or perhaps were given things, or perhaps were oftentimes family pieces brought over from Germany. And this scroll case, it's not an Esther scroll. It's actually, I guess what we'd call maybe a testimonial scroll, is given thanks to Nathan and Lena for their many philanthropic efforts in the Holy Land during the time period. But Nathan was also very philanthropic here in New York. In the 1890s, he actually helped write a book talking about the leading cause of death among babies was the inaccessibility of clean milk. And he is really responsible for the widespread pasteurization of milk in this country. And I know it's a little bit hard to kind of wrap our heads around because, we just go to the store, we don't think about it, take it for granted. But in addition to this study that he did, he really put his money where his mouth is, and he created these milk depots or milk stations in major cities across the eastern United States, including here in New York. And this is an original milk bottle that we have on exhibit. And they were very special because they were rounded at the bottom, because you could either go and get either very low-cost milk for your child or sometimes free milk. And they were rounded at the bottom, so then you wouldn't keep it, you would have to give it back and then get more milk. So it does not stand up on its own. Nathan also had a very, I don't know how to say this, maybe a pleasurable side to him as well, and he was an avid horse racer. In fact, there are many tales and images of him riding his horse up and down what is now referred to as Harlem River Drive. So this is a painting by the famous artist Henry Collins Bisham, who did many of the great 19th century paintings of animals, dogs, horses as well. And this is this was painted in Europe when he and Lena were in the south of France with one of his horses. Another interesting Strauss piece that's on view is this family wedding cup. And it's called a wedding cup because it was used at almost every wedding in the Strauss family. How do we know that? Well, I mentioned that Judge Lehman kept his little notebook, his little catalog of objects. And here is object number 69. Kiddush cup belonged to Lazarus Strauss, who was the patriarch of the family who first immigrated to the United States, and used at marriages of all the grandchildren, given to me by Mrs. Cones, that would have been Nathan's sister, Hermione, after Charles's wedding. And the matching up of what was in the catalog and what was in our collection had never really been done before. And so about 8 or 9 years ago, I had an intern and we decided to match up all of the pieces in his catalog. I would say we did our best. Sometimes it would just say Kiddush cup bought at auction. Okay, that could be 40 of them. And so again, we had to very slowly deduce which Kiddush cups were which. And this was really the last one that we came across was this one. So therefore, we determined that this was the Strauss cup that was used at the family weddings. So I want to now talk about Nathan's brother Isidore and his wife Ida. Isidore and Ida sadly died in the Titanic. And Isidore's body was recovered, hers was not. And on loan to us from the family, this has been passed down to his great-great-grandson, is this little fob locket with his initials, IS. And this was on his waistcoat next to his pocket watch, and inside were pictures of his children. And so this fob actually went down the Titanic. And so we have a piece in our exhibition that was quite literally on the Titanic. Also on view is this sheet music that features Isidore and Ida in the center with a little halo over their heads. If you're interested, you can download our audio guide on Bloomberg Connects, and I actually hired a Yiddish performer to sing this song. It talks about Isidore and Ida, and especially Ida, and how brave she was and how she was a heroine. She could have gotten on a lifeboat as a woman with a first-class ticket, but instead she said, you know what, I've lived a wonderful life. I'm going to stay with my husband, and she gave her fur coat and her seat to her maid. And this is actually in a first-hand account by another survivor who had overheard this. And, you know, I have to be a little bit skeptical and wary of all things that we take on view into our exhibition. And so I did a little bit of research, and it was fascinating. I came across this document on the right. This is digitized in the archives of Nova Scotia. And it's all of these talk about the bodies that were recovered after the Titanic disaster. And of course, it also mentions what was on them, what they were wearing. And this is, I think, number 96 that had to do with this is Isidore. And it talks about his pocket watch and the fob locket as well. So, you know, just to kind of cross the T's, dot the I's, it was fascinating that you can actually look through these documents. The Strausses are memorialized, Isidore and Ida, I should say, in two places here in Manhattan. On the right, if anyone's ever walked past Macy's, of course, on 34th Street, this beautiful memorial was given by the employees of Macy's. And on the left, in my neighborhood on the Upper West Side, is Strauss Park. This is a tiny little park on 106th Street where this was actually near where the home of the Strausses were. They actually had given the land to it. And this beautiful statue from 1913 by Augustus Lucum. That's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. Of course, happy to answer any questions. Encourage all of you to come visit the exhibition, which will be on view through May 17th of next year, so there is plenty of time. And of course, I also mentioned our audio guide too. You can listen to more behind-the-scenes stories. You can hear that music of the Titanic score if you wanted to as well. And this is on the Bloomberg Connects app. So wishing you all a good Yontif, a Shana Tova, and I'm happy to take any questions too. Thank you. Where was it? That was at 76th Street and 5th Avenue, 1891. And before that, from 1874 until then, they were actually very close to us right now. They were at 63rd Street in Lexington. Yeah. Yes, Fred?
Curious on that, because that letter where he resigns, he says it lists 66th and 5th Avenue, which is a strange typo. Because I was pronounced.
Yes, that is definitely a typo. Yeah, I didn't notice that. Thank you.
Just a couple of brief comments. That wonderful statue
That's right, yeah.
Because I think it's just so poignant
Mhm.
in terms of that piece. Just a remark about that wonderful letter that one of your volunteers found with regards to the Zionism question. I do think it's extraordinary, and this is the first time I'm learning about it. I haven't had a chance to come to the exhibition yet, but it does seem in keeping with flavors of, regardless of the class, but certainly the Germanized Reform Jews in America, which is to say that I'm not getting the sense, despite what you may have visited, unless there's something you want to share about this, that the idea is that folks seem to be going to Palestine, but rather seeing Palestine as a refuge
Mm.
for Eastern Europeans who were affected by the bombs, or was there in fact some sense in which upper-class assimilated Germanized Jews in America or elsewhere were imagining Palestine as a place for them rather than America, Germany?
I really think that Nathan was an outlier. I have not seen, I mean, our last exhibition was about Theodor Herzl, and I always like to connect it to somehow to our history, and we had a few letters that were from Richard Gottheil, who was Gustav's son, who was an academic at Columbia. And both Richard and his father were really ostracized for their Zionist views. And this was even 20 years before Nathan writes this letter. We have found in the archives recently a letter from Gustav Gottheil about 2 years before he dies, where the temple is actually trying to withhold his pension because he is so outspoken about Zionism. Not necessarily from the pulpit, but he's publishing things and he's supporting his son who goes to the Third Zionist Congress. I really do, I mean, I haven't done like any deep dives, but I really do think, he was such an outlier in this situation.
It's such a timely issue as folks debate Israel, Palestine, etc. I'm just thinking about the ways in which organizations like the B'nai that started with B'nai Abraham,
Right.
Germanized the Eastern European immigrants, and all
Yes.
that sort of stuff. That we know that our ancestors, some of us are ancestors, we know that American Reform Jews, American Jews felt uncomfortable, just as in Europe, with the Eastern Europeans.
Right.
And actively, the Eastern Europeans were suspicious of the so-called missionary activity of these people they didn't even think were Jews.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
can't help but wonder, in terms of thinking about Palestine as that refuge,
Mhm.
whether it might have been, again, a little easier to imagine some folks placed there
I see.
rather than the swarm of immigrants at the turn of the century.
I see what you're saying. Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Very interesting. I mean, another kind of insight I can maybe glean into that a little bit. I mean, it certainly didn't stop, the wave of Eastern European immigrants. I think one section that I wish I could have included more, but there wasn't enough visual material in the exhibition, was about our philanthropy and tzedakah that the congregation has so been a part of for decades since its beginnings. And one of those was the founding of settlement houses for men on the Lower East Side. There was the Emanu-El Brotherhood, and for women in Yorkville, the Emanu-El Sisterhood. Those were mainly supported by certain members of the congregation, but again, it was also supported by the congregation as a way to kind of keep them away from the doors of 43rd Street and Fifth Avenue.
Because the rhetoric uses words like Oriental and all this sort of stuff in terms of speaking about the
Right. So that's very interesting about Nathan. I would have to kind of read a little bit more.
far away is more
Yeah.
comfortable than Manhattan and New York.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One tiny point I wanted to ask about, I know you may have mentioned this another time, I think you did explain this another time, that Pufax receipt spells with an I rather than an A.
Yes. That would have been the kind of German way of spelling out Emanu-El. I've seen it in the archives. Sorry, just to show you what he's talking about. It's hard to see here, but right behind me, right under here, Der Emanu-El, Emmanuel with an I think it probably stops at some point in the 1860s. Yeah. Please.
When they hired the first rabbi, did they say what the rabbi's salary
I don't think it did, actually. It must have, but I haven't looked thoroughly through that, only because it was not in the building for such a long time because it was being conserved. But I have had, was able to do a little bit of experimenting with, I know this is maybe not the best thing to say, but like AI and translation, because you don't have to like physically type in every single word like in Google Translate. Certainly my very little training in German doesn't allow me to kind of read the 19th century script. But I'm sure it does, but I haven't, I would have to kind of look at it after it's on view. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please. Yeah, it's on 34th Street on the exterior of the building. I believe it's to the left of kind of one of those, I know there's so many entrances, right? But the kind of like that main entrance, I think there's a little awning. You can't miss it though, yeah. Okay, well, I thank you all so much, and I hope you'll come see the exhibition on another day, and good Yontif. Thank you.